E. Garner King obtained his MD with distinction from the University of Alberta in 1963. He joined the university as an assistant professor and director of the University of Alberta Hospital's Intensive Care Unit in 1971. In 1986, he was appointed chair of the Department of Medicine. As chair, he was an academic leader, encouraged excellence, and he attracted many new academic staff from all over the world. His vision and determination created a firm direction for the Department of Medicine. Dr. King was described as the most dynamic and effective teacher in the Department of Medicine, a great man, a true friend, and a caring physician who broke new ground in clinical medicine as an inspiring teacher and as an academic leader. Dr. King set the bar high with his example as a physician, a leader, a teacher, and a scholar.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a very special Medical Grand Rounds. It's, of course, our annual Garner King Memorial Lecture. And I'm delighted today to have a speaker who really highlights, a number of the things we're so proud of with Dr. King as our former department chair. But before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enrich our vibrant community. So delighted to introduce Dr. Kwadwo Kyeremanteng. Almost, not quite. So Dr. K, as he's affectionately known, is the department head of critical care at the Ottawa Hospital. He cares for the sickest of the sick patients in the intensive care unit. And as you all know, Dr. King was also an internist intensivist and also graduated from the University of Alberta, as did our speaker today. Dr. K's research is dedicated to improving efficiencies and access to palliative care services in the ICU, with the emphasis on the need to fight racism in healthcare. He's the host of the ever-growing podcast Solving Healthcare, and I've had a chance to listen to a couple of episodes, and he's actually featured apparently some of our local physicians in his podcast. So if you get a chance, have a listen. It generally features interviews and discussions on the topic of improving healthcare delivery in Canada. Through the lens of cost effectiveness, dignity, and justice, his aim is to challenge the status quo while exploring gaps, assumptions, and different perspectives in the pursuit of solving problems within Canada's healthcare system. He's the founder of the Resource Optimization Network, a multidisciplinary research group working to reduce health spending without compromising care, and of Solving Wellness, a virtual health and wellness platform dedicated to addressing burnout in the healthcare professionals. He's also an associate professor at the University of Ottawa and the author of Unapologetic Leadership, Finding the Moral Courage to Do the Right Thing. So I'm delighted to welcome him to talk about navigating life after a global pandemic.
First of all, it is an absolute pleasure to be here as a former U of A grad, being back in these halls, seeing some familiar faces again. It's been incredible couple of days. I just wanted to also thank Dr. Kassan for taking this on. Like, this is a topic, in my opinion, that is so important, because a lot of you guys in this room or online has made true sacrifices for your patients and your community in terms of stepping up in a time of need. You know, like when I look in the audience, there's a lot of subspecialists that stepped in to those COVID wards in a time where we didn't know how things were going to go. And you made that sacrifice and you stepped up. And I'll say, as an intensivist who during the pandemic, ICU got a lot of attention, but I felt like the work that was done on the wards was so important. Like you shielded us from a lot of the pressures that would have come if you weren't handling those acute patients that were on what we used to call 200% oxygen, or those patients that were normally would be in a more acute setting, but you guys took that on. And I must say it meant a lot from an ICU perspective, but also recognizing that it takes a toll. It takes a toll to be able to do this. So yeah, I'm keen and excited to talk to you guys about some of the ways that we can recover collectively as an individual, as an organization, and the tools we could use as leaders to promote health and wellness and reduce burnout. I'll give the caveat, I do not by any means pretend to be an expert in a lot of this content, but it's stuff that we've either worked for myself, like throughout my own experience through battling through burnout, or some of the guests that we've had on the show, which as Dr. Kassan mentioned, we have some guests that are currently in the audience, which we'll talk about. But I think it's really commendable that a group is taking this on front and center, not just putting it on paper, but putting it into action. All right, so just quickly, I have no financial disclosures. So I mean, when I think of my wellness journey, I must say I felt like I've been a bit of an old school doc. Like I've come from that era where you just hustled. Wellness and burnout wasn't really front and center. We weren't talking about it much. And the priority was, how do we become good docs? How do we fit in? And one of the things that started to come up though, as I was going through the ranks, was really the moral distress issue. I remember as near the end of my training, we were seeing we'll call her Mrs. E. She's a lady in her late 70s, end stage cancer, and the teams and the family weren't seeing eye to eye in terms of the direction of care. And so we're going through rounds talking about the respiratory failure, what have you, and I at the corner of my eye, I could see the nurse holding back tears, like really doing her best not to cry. And I remember I'm like, hey, is everything okay? Like, what's going on? And she looked at me, she's like, Wojo, like every time I walk into that room, I feel like I'm torturing that patient. 12 hours a day, me going in there, poking, prodding, suctioning that patient. It takes a toll. It's hard. And this is when I started to pivot in terms of realizing how much moral distress that many clinicians are going through. And at that time, it was a bit of a signal to me that maybe we need to address this. But it wasn't, once again, when it came to burnout and wellness, it wasn't front and center for me. My interest was in how to make our healthcare system more effective, how we could be more efficient with our resources. And so we started to take on projects. A lot of our projects were on end-of-life care and ICU, but weren't really tackling the wellness side. And more of our members came to me saying, you know, Kwadwo, you for us to be an efficient, to be an effective group, you need to address wellness. Like if you don't have the staff that are coming up and showing up in their best shape or form, how are we going to deliver care? If there's more and more nurses, more and more staff calling in sick because of stress leave, how are we going to address this? So we took it on. So we did a couple of grants we were awarded for a nurse intervention study to reduce burnout. We took on Solving Wellness, which we'll talk about in a second, a virtual format to reduce burnout that we launched during the pandemic, and start to gain some momentum. And then, unfortunately, March 2020 happens. And as I alluded to, these were unprecedented times. Like it was really, when you take a bird's eye view and think about what we were dealing with and what the stress of the situation, it's incredible. Like as from a personal vantage point, you're seeing all the news, what was happening in New York, what you saw what was happening in in Italy, and we're starting to trickle in some COVID patients. It started off on our wards and emerge. And you're saying, are we going to be the next Italy? Are we going to be the next New York? Are we going to get sick? Are we going to pass it along to our family members? Are we going to be overwhelmed? All these worries, all these stress took a toll. And I'll never forget, I was there for our very first COVID patient that came into our ICU. And I'll say this objectively, we weren't ready. Like, we weren't ready for the, like, psychologically, emotionally, physically, and luckily, you know, you learn, you get through it, and you realize that you can serve and protect yourself, and so the stresses start to dissipate a bit. But then there was all these other factors. Like, this is a picture of our nurses after unfortunate death of one of our patients, and in that first wave, there were patients that, as all you know, that died alone. I remember this patient, if I'm not mistaken, was a woman in her 80s, lived an amazing life, huge family, and she had to say goodbye to her loved ones via Zoom or via FaceTime, surrounded by people in PPE that she can't even recognize their face, can't see their smile, can't see their hurt. And that took a toll, a massive toll on staff. And then on top of everything else, you had to deal with the pressures outside of the hospital. Those of us that had young families, homeschooling, how are we going to address the needs of our kids? You may have had elderly parents that were still in need of care, or maybe they're in retirement homes or long-term care, and you're not able to see them. So all that added societal pressure as well, on top of the pressures at work, were massive. And at a personal level, I in the early waves, I was okay. You know, in fact, in some ways, I felt, maybe I feel a bit guilty saying this, but I felt excited to come to work because we had a purpose, we had a goal. We, at the time, like, everyone was rallying around us, saying, like, with all the concerns around COVID. But what was starting to get exhausting was there was no end in sight. When you thought maybe we're getting to the end, there's another wave. There's another wave of restrictions, and there was no clear end in sight. And for me, things start to tip when we were in I think it was our third wave. So April 2021, that was in Ottawa, that was our busy time. We had about half of our patients were transfers from the GTA. So once again, tons of patients away from their families. We increased our capacity by at least 30%, no, 50%, sorry. And we're now extra staff. I'm sleeping in hospital, and I was with a respiratory therapist, one of our more seasoned, stoic respiratory therapists. It was 4 a.m, and we're looking at this patient that was on BiPAP, and we're asking ourselves, like, should we intubate this patient? And we're going back and forth about it, and we're not seeing eye to eye about it. Because during that wave, you intubate somebody, they're on a vent for 3 weeks, and we saw it throughout that cycle. And while discussing it with that nurse or the RT, she started to cry, and I was like, hey, like, it's okay. Like, what's going on? She's like, Cordial, this is my 4th night in a row. I am so tired of seeing these patients suffer on the ventilator. I'm just done. Like, this is so hard. And to me, that was just the canary in the gold mine coming from her, realizing that if our most seasoned, stoic respiratory therapist is struggling right now, there's a lot of people out there feeling the same way. And soon after that wave, we lost a significant amount of staff in our ICU. I was still liaising with I was still working in one of our other community hospitals. And our ICU at that Montfort hospital lost 20% of their nursing staff after that wave. And to me, once again, this is a sign that we need to be proactive. We need to do something to address to address the burnout. And then for me, when I hit my proverbial wall, it was I just took on. I was about 6 months into the department head position, January 2022-ish. There's the Omicron wave, and I was heavy clinical, having to deal with all the administrative issues with staff all swabbing positive, but yet we need to be at work with workplace isolation, meeting after meeting. We're talking about that yesterday, Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. And then the other component of this, I did get the chance to talk about with Lenora yesterday, but we're doing a lot of advocacy for keeping schools open, and I was getting annihilated online, like just troll after troll, attacks on our family. It just got really heavy. And to me, it was like, I need to do something. I need to be able to become a better form of myself to help me navigate through these crazy times. And so I don't know if it was just fortuitous or if it was fate or whatnot, but this is Jody Wilding. She was she's an executive coach, former nurse, and she was reaching out a few times to wanting to jump on the show and talk about this concept called self-leadership. And I'll tell you, this is something that transformed me during this time. It was this idea of what brought you to your job, what was what brought you joy and fulfillment into your job, and whatever that is, try and bring it to the workplace every day. You know, like if you ask yourself, why did you become a general internist? Why did you become a respirologist? Why did you become a gastroenterologist? What was it that drew you to that profession? And lean in on that. So for me, it was my biggest thing as an ICU doc and a primary care physician was always connection. You know, reaching, like having those moments with your patients and family where you can, through your communication style, appease their worries, address their needs, and show up. And for the first few weeks after I hit my wall, this was the priority. You know, I know I'm going to be late for that Zoom meeting. I'm going to, maybe rounds will be a little bit longer, or we didn't do our sign out rounds on time. That's okay. I didn't get to that email that I was wanting to address, but this is going to be the priority. What fulfills me is connecting with the patients, my family, and my team. And that in and of itself, if I was going to say the big change for me, was when we made that transition on focusing on that self-leadership piece. Soon after, this is one of our she's a clinical psychologist, Michelle Sorensen. She works with us on our Self and Wellness platform. And one of the many themes that were coming through was a lot of guilt within healthcare providers. When you're getting called how many times to try and fill that overtime, to try and fill the schedule, and you're gassed, you're done because of all the reasons we mentioned. There's a lot of guilt. And one of the keys, in my opinion, at the individual level to heal, to recover from all that's going on, is to have some self-compassion. It's okay. You know, one of the things we talked about on the show, the technique to tap into self-compassion is, if your friend were to come to you with the exact same issue, saying your friend or colleague comes to you and says, you know, I have worked 4 overtime shifts, I haven't seen my family, I'm gassed, I'm not eating well, I'm not sleeping, and they're asking me to come in, what would you say? And have that voice in your head, not the, oh, I need to step up, I need to be that player. Really having that lens of asking yourself, it's okay. What would you say to another person if they came to you with the exact same issue? And that to me was an excellent way of tapping into self-compassion. As many of you know, going through the ranks in medicine, sometimes you lose yourself a bit. You feel like you gotta play a certain role. you gotta appear as your superiors would want you to appear as. And that takes a toll. When you are discongruent with who you are and how you're behaving or how you're appearing, that can be taxing. And you think about what you try to get into med school, you gotta step up. Residency, fellowship, staff job, securing that staff job. All often you have that voice inside saying, can you actually show up the way you want to show up? I was a bit inspired last night. So Brendan is a classmate of mine, and I don't know if people know how ridiculous Brendan truly is, but I've never seen Brendan in the work setting, and so when he showed up yesterday, I was anticipating, oh, we're gonna get serious Brendan. We're gonna get the Brendan that has to be 100% professional all the time. He's there with Clarence, his supervisor, Dr. Kassam is supervisor. Like, here we go. And the energy the whole time he was Brendan. He was shooting, he was joking around, he was talking about his clinical experiences and had everyone everybody smiling. And it was just inspiration for those out there that are early in their career. Like, you can be authentic. And I encourage you to be authentic, because this will land you in a place where you're meant to be. If you're showing up as your authentic self and you're not feeling at home, well, maybe that's not where you belong. But for you, like, the potential, especially the clinicians out there, the young ones out there, the sky's the limit. So you want to be in an environment where you get to shine. And so this is something that is so important. Brendan, I put this picture up because I'm pretty as ridiculous as Brendan, and we try and create that environment in the workplace. So one of my favorite things to do on my first few days in the ICU is when I announce rounds, like there's two teams. So I'll go on the mic and be like, so Dr. Careman takes rounds, AKA Team Supreme, is about to start in bed 1. And Dr. DeGidio's team, AKA the B Squad, is starting in bed 33. But yeah, no, I think it's super important to show up authentically. All right, so as I mentioned, we talked about, we set up this grant and this project, Solving Wellness, which was a virtual format to try and address a couple things. Well, we set it up, one, because we wanted to create an environment where healthcare providers felt more resilient. I often refer to it like creating that body armor. So when you are going through times of adversity, you're that much more ready to show up. And the second thing that came up when we launched this was a lot of folks felt like they weren't as healthy as they wanted to be. As many of you could appreciate, during the pandemic, a lot of the tools that people would use for healthy living weren't available, whether you were going to the gym, whether you played on sports teams. And so there was that concept of the COVID-20. I don't know if anyone's heard about that, but yeah, you end up, a lot of us put on a couple extra pounds during the pandemic. So this was something that we thought we'd put together to try and guide folks. And I'll preface this with, I put a lot of, some of these recommendations are some of the things that I personally find most effective. But when it comes to health and wellness, as many of you could appreciate, this is very personalized. It's what works for you is most important. So when it comes to stress management, I think in general, or even when it comes to health in general, probably the most important thing that you could optimize is your sleep. I don't know if people are familiar with Pareto's principle or 80-20 rule. But I think sleep is the 80-20 of your stress management, but more importantly, your health. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room where this aspect of health is compromised. Like my sleep is not, is not my best suit, especially when you look at call, when you look at. So yeah, big fan of eye covers, big fan of earplugs too, to try and enhance sleep quality. Big fan of keeping the room cool. It's always a dispute between wife and I because I run hot, she runs cold, but you keeping the room hot or cool, sorry. Um, I think honestly, if you could enhance your sleep quality, this will go a long way, not only for stress management, but for metabolic health, your mental health, all aspects. Couple of other tips that I find helpful is you hear a lot about meditation. I personally was veered away from it because I didn't like this idea of sitting in silence for 20 minutes. And so some of the stuff that I find effective is around your breathing. So focused, like box breathing as an example, doing that for a few minutes. Or I don't know if there's any Andrew Huberman fans out there, but his lab really evaluated this breathing technique. Is called the physiologic sigh. And what it is take a deep breath in. At the end of your inspiration, you take a sniff and then a slow expiration. And when his lab evaluated this method versus box breathing versus some guided meditation, this seemed to have more impact on participants' mood and allowing them to be a little bit more have more parasympathetic tone. So I like to do this before I grab my phone or even while waiting in line for coffee. Just take a couple of those physiological sighs, and I find it could be quite impactful. Last thing I'll say is like a gratitude practice. I think everyone could benefit from that. I try and do it with the family, like when we're all sitting when we get to sit down together. It's with the sports and the activities, it could be challenging at times, but even getting the boys to say what they're grateful for that day, and just changes the feel of the room, changes your mood. So I think that's an important one. Exercise. So I don't know if anybody recognizes the person on this slide, but it's Dr. Jen McComb, who was our fourth guest on our podcast. Actually, I do want to highlight one thing with Jen. We were talking about her parents last night. She came on the show to talk about her experience with her son Henry, and unfortunately having a diagnosis of cancer as an 8-month-old, and Jen navigating the system and having that perspective of being on the other side, and some of the complications she's had to deal with Henry. And luckily he's doing well now. But I gotta say, like, she is in so many ways the example for wellness. Like the way she, like her and her husband got through this time. I still to this day, like in so many ways, I know pumping up your tires a little bit, but like you were like my hero in the way you were able to get through that time and to stay functional. Like she was still showing up as a physician, still showing up as a mom to the rest of her kids. And now you look at her today, she's got the block of the year. Am I correct in saying that?
Yep.
Yeah, neural block being the block of the year. And being her authentic self and furthering her education. She did a fellowship mid-career. Well, can I say mid-career? Does that mid-career doing a fellowship on autoimmune encephalitis? Say that twice. But like I really want to commend my friend and colleague Jen for being that example. And when I look at how Jen handled things, the exercise, I mean, she encompasses many of the things that we're talking about, but this is an important part of her life too, is making sure she stays moving. She's a CrossFit enthusiast, and not all of us need to be doing CrossFit to stay healthy. I often say keep it simple when it comes to your movement and exercise. Do stuff that you're drawn to. Make it easy. If you have fun playing tennis, you have fun going to a yoga class, whatever it might be that piques your interest. That should be your focus. I mean, I often hear that argument from clinicians that we don't have time to exercise. Like I just don't have time in my day or whatever. This is not a priority because of that. And one of the things that we really focused on our platform was, how do you squeeze it in? How do you squeeze the ability to exercise throughout the day? And one of the things that we emphasize are like exercise such as a high intensity interval training, where you're doing short bursts of intense exercise. You could squeeze that out in 10 to 15 minutes, right? And so we would set up programs for clinicians to focus on that. There's the idea of exercise snacks. Have you ever guys heard about this? Our family likes to do this too. If you have one of those lazy days, we're in Edmonton, so it's minus 48 outside, and you're stuck at home, you're doing the Netflix thing, or you're watching a Oilers game. What I tell the boys is, every time there's a whistle, we got to do some activity. So first period we'll do burpees. Second period we'll do squats. Whenever there's a whistle, or there's or when there's a commercial break. Just squeezing in those times during the day where you actually get a little bit of movement. After you finish your lunch, go for a walk. Whether it's in, I mean, this campus is huge. Whether you keep it inside or outside, go out for a walk and recharge the batteries. But yeah, I think the idea that we got to pivot from is the idea that we don't have enough time to squeeze in movement and exercise during the day, and just ask ourselves, how do we squeeze it in, and really being strategic from that perspective. So nutrition, this box is huge. Like, in terms of people, if you go on your IG or social media, everyone's got a solution on how we should be eating better, what we should be focusing on. And once again, to me, this is something that's heavily personalized. What I'll say is a couple concepts that I think matter. To eat well, food, like doing your food prep during the week and giving your best chance of success is so important. Starting on that Sunday, having your meals planned, having all the food that you're thinking about for lunch already set up, so that you're less likely to grab the Timmy's, grab the Mickey D's when you're in a rush, I think is important. I think if I were to recommend only a couple of things, focusing on protein as a way of improving the way we eat, I think it's so much bang for your buck. Increase your lean muscle mass, make you fuller, and as you're fuller, you're less likely to grab the sugary snacks. I think this is something that I think we utilize to improve the way we eat. And then the motherly things, just avoiding processed foods as much as possible, and focusing on whole foods, I think can make a massive difference. And then community building. I don't know if any of you recently have been to an in-person medical conference or any conference. Since the pandemic, that feeling that energy in the room, the energy in the meetings have been so amazing. And you don't realize how much you were missing out on until you're in front and until you get it back. And I think this is something that really resonates to tell you like how important it is to be connected, to have that sense of community. And I had one of the more memorable moments for me was my eldest son. He had his first hockey tournament after like a disjointed hockey season, and seeing everybody in the crowd, whether you're on the other side or not, just that energy within the arena. Everybody was so happy to be around each other, to cheer on the boys. Like, the boys got annihilated too, but it didn't matter, right? It was just being together was so healing. It was so great to see. So I think that really tells you about the importance of community. And this is something that is easy from my perspective to stack. Like, if you want to, in terms of exercise, whether it's with a fitness class or playing, like my Huckleberry's playing hockey, like where you get to get that exercise out and also connect with your teammates. That to me is a good way of stacking activities. So when we were talking with the medical residents yesterday, one of the things that came up was this idea that, in medical school and in all our training, we don't really get trained on some of these softer skills. Like we were talking about negotiation as an example. We all have to negotiate at some point. I recommend the book, Never Split the Difference. You won't regret that, by Chris Voss. We talk a little bit about leadership, but the one of the most important ones, in my opinion, is time management. This is something that I think everybody could benefit from. And a couple of things that we talked a lot about this in our wellness community, and one of the things that came up repeatedly is how you do that. And I think one of the things that people need to do is put value to your time. As an example, if you, as just making it elementary, you choose a random dollar value per hour where you value yourself at. And if an activity that does not bring you joy is less than that, delegate that off. Like I don't know the last time I mowed my lawn. I don't know the last time I shoveled my snow. That is not the best use of my time. So I would rather do the things that I enjoy, connect with my family, be more productive, instead of doing the tasks that could be delegated. So delegate when appropriate, build a team around you that you feel that you can delegate some of these tasks to. Like one of the most impactful moves that I made in my career was when we were building Resource Optimization Network. I didn't really have much in terms of belief, like in terms of administrative support. It was something that we really took on our own. And I was always feeling stuck with multiple steps when it came to publications, especially when the edits they were asked, or not the edits, but the submissions, got to reformat this, and it was a barrier. And I remember saying this to my wife is like my superpower, by the way. Every solution basically that's intelligent comes from her. I'm complaining about it, and she says, "Why don't you just hire an assistant? Hire your own research assistant." And I was like, "That's a good idea. We'll stop waiting for permission or waiting for support. Just do it." So I hired Cynthia Wan, $20 an hour, undergrad student, and went from publishing 1 paper a year to 5, just for that move alone. Because looking at the barriers and the steps that was holding me back, that was completely delegatable. And so thinking about the value of the time, thinking what you could where you could delegate, and then also even things as simple as avoiding these distractions. Like I can't believe how many of my staff members, and I preach this all the time, get notifications for their email. That is outrageous as far as I'm concerned. Number one, how are you gonna, like, the amount of emails all of you in the room are getting is gonna be insane. And then how much of a distraction when you're trying to do deep work, when you're trying to do that manuscript, that hard email, when you're getting ding, ding, ding. Like it is like, stop the notifications. Like my philosophy, email twice a day. Nothing, I don't check email past 5. I don't check it on weekends. I set that tone. People know that about me. If they really need to get a hold of me, they know my number, they could give me a call. But leaving a bit of boundary so you can make more time is so important. And the last thing I'll say about this is a double-edged sword, and I'm a victim of this. You can create more time with several ways that we're talking about here, but what you choose to do with that time is important, because my tendency is just to take on more. I'll be like, okay, let's do that extra. Okay, we can now add that grant. Now we can add that extra project. Now we could do that extra committee. Whereas in this post-pandemic era, I highly encourage you guys to do stuff that fills your bucket. Do stuff that will allow you to be more resilient and to show up in your best form. When we talked earlier, Dr. Kassan was telling me about your, let me phrase it right, you have an AI officer, or
PhD science.
Yeah, this to me is mad exciting. I personally think the landscape of everything is changing because of generative AI, but in medicine, in the next few years, you're going to see there's going to be so much changing as a result. And from a wellness and productivity and time management perspective, I can't tell you already current, like in this day right now, in AI in its current form, how amazing it is. And I know there's a lot of doomsday AI people, and I don't get me wrong, I think there's some validity there. But right now is exciting times as far as I'm concerned. You can, like, in terms of the application, so clinically, I think you guys had to talk about this. We were working with one of our working groups, we're working with Dragon Nuance. You're going to be in clinic, you're going to be just having a conversation with your patient, and the AI platform will generate your note based on your conversation. Think about how much of a time saver that is. And the first iteration, like, and these are early days, folks. So the iteration that I saw with the Nuance was basically ready to go. And this is only going to get better. But in terms of how you could apply this to your everyday, I recommend everybody, this is what I would do. I would take, whether it's ChatGPT, Bing, whatever AI platform you use, and start playing with it now. Use it as your main search engine. Get familiar with it, because the potential is amazing. I'll give you a concrete example, and you can judge me for this, but it's okay, because it's all good. But I was late. I didn't realize I was supposed to give my board a briefing note on the status of ICU. It just slipped in the schedule, and I was like, I did not see this. And it was due the next day. And I'm like, how am I going to do that? Like, I'm stuck with the boys. I'm like, I only have a few hours tonight. I don't want to stay up all night working on this. And so I grabbed this app. It's called Oasis. And what you could do is you could have a conversation with the app, and it will generate either a blog post, an email, letter, or what have you. So I take my phone. I say, okay, Oasis, I'm in a tough situation. I need to write a letter to my board focusing on maybe the successes of virtual critical care, or post-surgical care unit, XYZ. I want to highlight, or I want to talk about our challenges of HHR. I want to talk about our challenges of morale, but overall we're doing well. Make this less than 2 pages. See what happens. Took me, so literally probably I dictated that in about 5 minutes. The note that it produced, the letter, was magnificent. I sent it off to my admin assistant. I'm like, can you just touch this up? She's like, I barely had to do anything. And that was literally something that would have taken 2-3 hours for me, just because we want to make it perfect for the board. It took me 8 minutes. And I think a lot of this, leading in on this, can allow us to have more time to improve our quality of life. So I highly encourage people to play with it. All right. I don't know if people recognize. This is once again my friend, Dr. Halloran, in his prime. But I think this is something that a lot of us need to tap into. How we create more joy, how we create more play in our lives. It was one of the things that we noticed in our household, that when the pandemic hit, we got really serious. We used to have these dance parties. We used to play more with the boys. And because of the natures of our work, my wife's a psychologist too, we got really serious, and we lost our ability to find joy, to play. And I think it's important for us to be proactive in terms of trying to tap into this and lean on the things that really brought us fulfillment. And like, I'm thinking of Brendan right now. I see Kieran's in the room. I don't know if people know that they used to have a band. Do you guys know that? Like in medical school, that it's amazing band. It was called the Leprechaun Collective, something like that. And the beats were so fresh. But yeah, tapping into the things that bring you joy. All right, so what do you do from an organizational level? I think we need to just make this a priority. We need to make it a priority in terms of improving the health and wellness of our staff, and giving them a voice in terms of how we can execute on this. The picture on the left is one of our most, I'm really proud of this one. This was in the ICU, I don't think we're any different than any other ICU. We really had struggles with morale, post pandemic. And so we made a cognitive effort to try and improve that. So we had these events that we collaborated with the nursing staff, the respiratory therapists, what's going to work. And they said, we want to feel like we're part of the team. So initially we had a softball party or softball tournament, which was a real success. MDs took that down. And then this was our bowling night, probably our most successful night, where we had over 150 staff show up. We took over this bowling alley, had drinks post, and it was just a real amazing way to connect. We all felt that much more closer after such an event. Another group we worked with, Bayshore Health, they're a home care company, and they asked us to come and do to help out with their retreat to talk about some of these wellness topics. And it was just really refreshing to see an organization take this seriously. They were wanting to invest in their staff and provide events that gave them an opportunity to open up and talk about what their concerns are, and then also give them the tools to try and succeed. I want to give a quick love to my own organization, the Ottawa Hospital, which that is actually taking this to the next level. We've had 2 wellness centers that were opened up in the last year, which not only have like a quiet room, yoga area you could do yoga, meditate, massage chairs. That's not the bigger deal, but to me, what my hospital has done is actually listen to what the concerns are. So in this wellness center, you could see an occupational therapist and get all your testing, fit testing, TB testing, whatever it might be, like without an appointment. If you just walk in there, you could also have access to a psychologist without an appointment, assuming that they're free. So they were listening to the concerns of the people that are on the ground and trying their best to address it. The last thing that I think is going to put the Ottawa Hospital on the map is that they've developed a family health team. They are developing a family health team just for the Ottawa Hospital staff. So many of us, especially new staff that are coming through, don't have a family doctor. Difficult access to get some of the allied health services. But because of, once again, the concerns of the organization, the people that are on the ground, they are listening to that voice and executing in the best way they see how. The last thing I'll say about steps that our hospital has done is similar to that first case. There's been a lot of moral distress when it comes to goals of care, not only in ICU, but outside the walls of the ICU. So we formulated a goals of care team to try and address these concerns, when there are disputes between or discordance with what the care team feels is appropriate and with what the family would want or the patient would want. We implement this goals of care team, which encompasses palliative care, critical care, whatever subspecialty is involved. And it's been great. It's been highly supported by the hospital, highly supported by the board. And I'm hoping that we'll get some publications about it over the next within the next year or two. So in terms of leaders, what do we need to do? I think it's important that those that are in leadership positions, you need to lead by example. Like if we're going to say your well-being and attempts to reduce burnout are important, they need to see it through their leaders. So I'm saying, not like there's a reason. If you're saying to your staff, don't answer emails at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're not sending emails at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're not organizing meetings throughout the day. You're trying to protect your staff. You're being the change. I think that's a real important message for us as leaders. I think leaders need to connect with their staff. You need to really hear the needs and the demands and the concerns. And when you have that form of connection, people open up and you're more likely to show up more authentically. And in the same token, they'll feel seen. They'll feel like they have a voice, And that in and of itself, I think, could be an antidote to burnout. Another thing that I think is really important from a leadership perspective is we're in a time of a healthcare crisis where we need to be thinking innovatively to come up with some solutions. And I think leaders need to create an environment where it's safe to open up. It's safe to be able to, that whether you're a student, whether you're a resident, whether you're allied health, you have a voice that matters. I'll give a quick example. I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm going to hustle. One of my earlier in my career, or maybe I was a fellow, we had this patient in the ICU in a halo, self-extubates, gets super stridorous, desatting. We need to secure an airway. Call anesthesia overhead, they ain't coming. And so it's go time. And so I'm with load up the bronchoscope and try and get this patient, try and get the tube back in. Patient's agitated, their stats they're starting to desat. And I'm not sure what to do next. I'm starting to, I rarely panic, but I'm starting to get to that phase, because if we don't do something, we're going to lose this airway and she's going to arrest. One of my RTs pipes in and says, what about the Hooper maneuver? And what the Hooper maneuver was, it's one of our staff that now retired. You take nasal airway, you put an end of a 7 endotracheal tube in, and you bag from the nasal airway. So when she said that, I was like, yes, absolutely. Put in the nasal airway, start bagging the patient. Bought us probably about 5 minutes, but then we were able to secure the airway. If that youngish RT did not feel comfortable bringing this up in that moment, if we didn't create an environment where it's safe to speak up, I don't know if that patient would have made it. And so this is the importance, especially now in a time of crisis, that we need to create that environment where it's safe to speak up. I don't know if people knew that we had a fire recently at the Ottawa hospital. It was, I don't know if it made national news or not, but we had, it was crazy. It was, honestly, it was something I haven't seen before or thought I would experience, but we had to move half the hospital to another wing, and this was a picture that was taken at 12:30 in the morning on a Saturday with our staff, all coming in to help out. We all came in, we weren't sure how things were going to play out, but we all came in to see if we need to move patients, need to secure our ICU status. But this is everyone smiling with that positive mindset coming in. And it's something I must say, after doing our retreat last year at this time, something I was most proud of our group, that they recognize how important it is to show up with that positive mindset. Like, everyone in this room is a leader. When you walk into your ward, when you walk into your ICU, whatever it might be, people are feeding off your energy. They see how you're showing up. And if you're coming in with that positive mindset, with that positive energy, that lifts the people around you. And to me, this truly exemplified my group and how they choose to show up and the impact that it has on the staff around them. Couple last things. This is we talked about the book, and a lot of the concepts we talk about around leadership is around that. So if you want to check that out, Unapologetic Leadership, that's our social media links. That's the podcast. And last thing I want to say, this is a picture of my mom, who unfortunately passed away last month. And going through that experience, it truly put things in perspective. You realize, you get caught up in a lot of the things like, hey, should I be showing up to this? I missed that meeting, or should I need to respond to that email? And I'll tell you, as we were surrounding mom and as she was taking her last breaths, nobody was talking about meetings they missed. Nobody was talking about, that email they didn't respond to. We were talking about her purpose, how she showed up, how she lifted her kids, how she served others in so many amazing ways. And I think it's just a healthy reminder to all of us that we need to focus on the important things and really not get caught up in the things that don't matter.
That was amazing. I personally took away so much, and I'm just going to start off by saying, you know, the things you talked about, so important. I wonder how, because we all know in our immediate circle is the most important to sort of start bringing them together and building that community and so on. I mean, it's one thing to go out to meetings in the larger circle. How do we start getting people to sort of engage and start coming back? And you know, you had 150 people show up to your bowling tournament. I mean, you know, what's the secret behind that?
I think it's engaging the group. Like when I look at what worked with our community was that we saw a need and we said, like, how do we achieve this? Giving them a voice in terms of how we solve this puzzle. And I think showing that you care, like I forgot to mention, like we had some town halls as well, like in terms of wanting to hear from our staff what their concerns were and how best to address them. But making sure that your staff or your community has a voice, and in that same token, asking them, like, how can we connect? What's the best way that we can achieve that? And sometimes it takes nudging. Sometimes, like we had we had some failed events. We had a curling night that we had to cancel because nobody dug curling, like obviously. I'm like, I ain't going to curling. You know what I mean? Pretty hard. But yeah, no, I think I honestly, I think it's a bit of taking initiative to make sure they have a voice and input, and then maybe nudging and putting some steps in action that results in them connecting.
Start with the grassroots.
Yeah.
I think we are pretty much at the end of time. So what I'm going to do is recommend that we have a little reception outside. I know Quad's sticking around for that. So, you know, just feel free to ask him any questions. And of course, hopefully people you won't mind if I say people can get in touch with you either through your various media channels or what have you. But I really think this illustrated what, what we need to do moving forward as we continue our journey to recovery, I guess. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks very much.